Welcome to Rust Releases. Today I'm going to give you a preview of Cargo's new Sparse Index Protocol that is available in the current nightly version of Rust and show you how you can try it out. Also, I did a quick video chat interview with Arlo Siemsen, so you will get to hear some of the details right from him. First, the news. What is this index that Cargo has? Well, you have seen it before, though you may not have realized what it was. When you run a Cargo command that needs to deal with dependencies, you've probably noticed it pause for a while saying, updating crates.io index. The index is the metadata about all the versions of all the crates on crates.io. And up until now, Cargo has always needed the entire index's Git repository to be present locally and up to date before it dealt with any crates that you depend on. I use Rust on multiple computers, and this happens to me whenever I start using Rust on a machine that I haven't used for a while. The screen capture we are watching now is from a laptop I hadn't used for about 3 weeks. It's also on a relatively low bandwidth connection, which slows it down even further. This took 6 minutes and 30 seconds to complete. That's outrageously inefficient given that I'm only dealing with a handful of dependencies. That's why there is now a Sparse Index Protocol only available on nightly so far. This new approach uses HTTP to download only information about the crates it is dealing with, rather than downloading and updating an entire Git repository using the Git protocol. To try out the new Sparse Index Protocol, you need to install the nightly version of Rust. If you already have a nightly version of Rust installed, make sure it is up to date by running rust up update to make sure your nightly version of Rust is new enough. Once that is done, then you enable the Sparse protocol by either adding this code snippet to the Cargo.toml file for a project or exporting this massively named environment variable. Then all you need to do is add +nightly as the first argument to Cargo to use the nightly version of Rust in Cargo. This works with any Cargo command that deals with dependencies, including but not limited to Cargo update, Cargo add, or if you haven't downloaded and compiled the actual dependencies yet, even Cargo run or Cargo build, etc. You get the point. When you run it for reals, it looks like this. Yeah, that's a lot faster. Now, let's hear from the man who implemented this feature, Arlo Siemsen. Arlo, what was the problem as seen by the users, and how does this solve it?
So the problem that the users have been having is that it takes a significant amount of time to download this Git repository that contains the metadata for every crate that's published to crates.io. And this solution of storing it in a Git repository worked fairly well for the first several years of Cargo because the number of crates was small. The Git repository was relatively small. But as it's grown exponentially and gotten more popular, the repository has gotten larger and larger, which has further increased the amount of time that it takes to download the index. So the solution that the Sparse protocol implements is to only download information on the crates that are actually being used by the current project. So as Cargo is running its resolver and figuring out which crates you're using and what their dependencies are, it just makes additional HTTP requests to the registry index to get the crates metadata as it needs it, rather than having to download everything all at once.
Does that make it easier for people to make registry implementations?
Absolutely, yeah. Rather than having to host a Git implementation, you can just host a standard HTTP endpoint. And that also makes it a lot easier to cache on things like content to delivery networks and should significantly reduce the load for registry hosts like GitHub.
Tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you coming from? What's your current role at Microsoft?
So I am in the Windows engineering system / part of Azure engineering system now as well. I came from a team where we were working on trying to integrate newer, safer programming languages into Windows in particular. We did an experiment there trying with creating a language that was transpiled C# into C++. And then eventually we moved towards focusing our efforts towards Rust as being a safe language. And we've since been working on that for the past several years.
How did you get into Rust originally?
I first started kind of playing around with it a little bit when I was in college. One of my friends told me about it, so I started looking into it then. That was around the time it was Rust 1.0 or just before it. And then At Microsoft, I worked on this other language based off of C# for a while, and we started having the day of learning opportunity where we could kind of go and experiment with on our own time for one day every month. So I started kind of learning Rust as another safe systems language, and then slowly more and more interest started to develop around Rust at the company, and our team kind of became the Rust in Windows, and then later the Rust in Azure, and now we're kind of trying to do the all up Rust at Microsoft effort.
How did you get involved with the new Sparse Index specifically? Is that just happened to pop up on your team's radar and you volunteered for it, or sort of how did you get involved?
I got involved with the Sparse work because we wanted to build a cargo registry for internal use at Microsoft. And the existing Git protocol is rather difficult to implement and to integrate into a registry server. And we wanted to move to a protocol that would be more straightforward to implement, that used more standard HTTP and was easier to integrate with the existing authentication providers that we had at Microsoft. So I found some initial work on the idea of just taking the Git registry and serving it over HTTP, and started kind of working with the Cargo community from there.
That's interesting. From my end, I actually saw when the Git storage team sort of raised a red flag with support saying, hey, this crates IO registry here is a super huge user of resources. Can you please reach out to the owners of this? And I sort of got involved as a liaison to, hey, I know who to talk to. This is Rust, and here's the people to talk to, and sort of connected the dots there. I didn't get any visibility into the Microsoft side of things until I sort of heard back through the Rust community that you were doing the implementation for the new Sparse Index. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, when I was initially talking to the Cargo people, I was like, we have a GitHub contact, but they weren't specifically saying who that was. And I'm suspecting that is now you.
Yeah, it was probably me. I am an unofficial but fairly active liaison for between Microsoft and GitHub, and between the Rust organization and GitHub. Not that there's a lot of traffic, but when there is, I tend to be in the middle of it, connecting people together.
Yeah, that's great to have that conversation and make sure the Rust community is, of course, very thankful of all the donation, I guess, of the hosting of the Crates.io index over these past years. And yeah, definitely good to keep open communication there and make sure we're trying to use resources effectively.
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing once it hits actual stable, your new sparse protocol. I look forward to seeing some of those graphs on the usage of the GitHub servers. I want to see those just plummet.
Yes, that'll be very exciting, of course, and that stabilization is scheduled to start happening in March. Now, that won't make it the default, so users will still have to opt into it. So I don't expect a huge decrease in the usage of the Git index at that time, but it will become an option to do unstable, especially in larger CI jobs. I'm expecting people will start opting into it just because of how much time it saves.
Right. Well, I actually tested it out myself, and I was flabbergasted how much faster it was. I was extremely pleased. I have several machines, so I'll occasionally come to a machine where I haven't really been using it for several weeks, and then I start doing something with Rust, and it's like, oh, updating the index, and it's going through tens of thousands of deltas, and it's just taking forever. I'm just like, oh, come on. And I tried the new one. It's just like that, just downloaded. It was so nice.
Yeah, and all that savings primarily comes from the fact that we only download what we need as the resolver is running, rather than trying to pre-download the entire index over Git. So it's just a significant amount of reduced work that enables that savings.
So tell me, is there a timeline for it becoming the default protocol?
I think it depends on how well the testing goes once it becomes stable. But my guess is once it's been stabilized in Cargo, which, like I mentioned, is going to happen in March, users can opt into it. Then we can, assuming that goes well, we can switch the default to use that for the nightly build of Cargo. And as you know, the Rust runs on these 6-week release trains. So we'll likely let it be stable for 6 weeks, and then we will enable it in the next version of nightly as the default. And there is a good amount of usage of nightly in the wild as well. So that will, I expect, have some kind of impact on the load at GitHub. And as that then rides the trains to stable, or to beta and then to stable, we'll expect significant reduction in load on GitHub.
If you were to say something to people who are going to test or are testing the new protocol, what would you ask them to look out for, or is there something specific you'd like them to report back on?
So there is a post on the Rust internals forum where you can post any kind of feedback you have. Um, I would say the most interesting cases are if you have any kind of availability of testing private registries. There's a couple implementations of that are available now. That's one area that hasn't had a lot of testing. And then publishing crates to crates.io hasn't had a lot of testing either. It's with the sparse enabled. So I would say definitely try checking out those. Otherwise, enable it for your desktop machine, enable it in CI builds. It's relatively easy to set up. You can just set an environment variable, and once it's stable, it will take effect.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about the new protocol?
Nothing else. Go ahead and test it, and hopefully it provides performance improvements for you.
And that's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe.